Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first item of tonight's agenda is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, December 14th. Recommendations to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Raymer, second by Councillor Lynch. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 2 is the minutes of the Land Use and Economic Development Standing Committee meeting held Monday, December 14th. The recommendations that these minutes be received.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Raymer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3 is the minutes of the Land Use and Economic Development Standing Committee meeting of Monday, January 11th. The recommendations that these minutes be received.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Lynch. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
The first item of business arising out of those minutes concerns Phase 1 zoning text amendment report to all RM apartment zones and RT2 townhouse zones. The recommendation is that Council endorse the public consultation plan for this two-phase process.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Raymer, second by Councillor Reid. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I just wanted to note to everyone that this is, again, we're upgrading our zoning, our apartment zones and zoning bylaws, etc. And one of the things that the committee did recommend is that when staff go out to our public consultations, that they have actual physical pictures of what an RM2 would be today, and beside it a lot plan, and when we change those zones that they show something that would be applicable so that it's very readily understandable for the general public. And so we have given that direction to staff, and I know that that's what's going to be carried out. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. No other speakers. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3.3 is a preliminary report on an application for a zoning amendment bylaw 4096 for a proposed subdivision at 3368 David Avenue. Recommendations that Council give first reading to bylaw 4096 and that this bylaw and its related application be referred to public hearing.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3.4 is also a preliminary rezoning application. It's for a badminton facility at 7 Burbidge Street, bylaw 4098. Recommendations that Council give first reading to bylaw 4098 and that this bylaw and its related application be referred to public hearing.
Move recommendation.
Second. Moved by Councillor Raymer, second by Councillor Lynch. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Because this is a change of venue in that area into going into a badminton facility from an M9 light industrial, we have asked and recommended that the area for referring it to the public be doubled in order that it takes advantage of all the businesses down there that could possibly be affected in that immediate area. So that was direction given. I don't know if you want me to make it an amendment, Your Worship, or not.
I see the clerk indicating that an amendment to our procedures would be best, probably because of matters of precedence. So I'll take that as an amendment that the
Thank you.
area be expanded. Is that sufficiently clear to the clerk's office?
Correct.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Robinson. Is there any discussion on the amendment? I see Councillor McDonnell. Is it on the amendment? Okay. I see no discussion on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? The amendment's carried unanimously. The motion as amended. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. I think that this facility or having a Badminton Center in Coquitlam is a good thing. I fully support having it in Coquitlam. I think that it would be well used. I think that there's a need for it. However, I have a little concern about the facility down on Burbidge Street. I spoke to staff about the area, and then I went down and took a look. And when you read through this, they expect 250 cars coming in there, 250 people a day. This is right in an area where there are trucks and loading bays and docks, and I really don't think that this is the area for this. It's an industrial zone. I think it's intended down there for trucks. It's intended down there for industrial purposes. And by inviting all these people to come down and park, and I can see issues and problems with with parking down there, getting in the way of vehicles and getting in the way of legitimate business down there. So while I support having a badminton facility in Coquitlam, I just can't support it in this location.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Motion is first reading and public hearing as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor McDonnell is opposed. The motion carries.
Item 3.5 is a preliminary report on an application for zoning amendment bylaw 4095 and then 5% park dedication requirements for proposed subdivision at 1404 Coast Meridian Road. Recommendations to give first reading to this bylaw 4095, that the bylaw and its related application be referred to public hearing, and that council require the owner of the proposed subdivision under file to provide 5% cash in lieu to address the provisions of section 941.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Reamer. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3.6 is consideration of fourth and final reading of rezoning amendment bylaw 4067. It's for a proposed subdivision at 1385 Coast Meridian Road. The recommendation is that council give fourth and final reading to this bylaw 4067.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3.7 is an extension of the approval period for fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw number 3991/2008 for a multifamily residential development at 835 Westwood Street. The recommendation is that council extend the maximum 12-month approval period for fourth reading for bylaw 3991 for an additional 6-month period.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3.8 concerns the 5% provision of parkland pursuant to Section 941 of the Local Government Act for the proposed subdivision at 3407 Galloway Avenue. Recommendations that the owner of the proposed subdivision at 3407 Galloway Avenue provide 5% cash in lieu to address the requirements of the Local Government Act.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3.9 concerns the draft Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy. There's a series of recommendations related to the fact that council is to advise Metro Vancouver that while the revised regional growth strategy dated November 2009 addresses most of the city's previously stated concerns, support for the RGS is contingent on Metro Vancouver doing the series of adjustments noted through A through G, and secondly, that council's resolution in this regard and the January 8th 2010 staff report be forwarded to all member municipalities of Metro Vancouver.
With the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor McDonnell. I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Number 2, I assume, means also forward to Metro Vancouver.
Correct, yes.
And for the viewing audience, this regional growth strategy is the next step in the planning of the region. Metro Vancouver is looking to have municipalities agree to a process for designing this region and the planning for the growth of this region over the next few decades. And this growth strategy has been modified several times. It's currently before us, and council is now considering making some more recommendations to Metro Vancouver as to how we would see it change to better adapt for the planning of this region. Our speaking list, I'll begin with Councillor Reid.
Thank you. At the Land Use Committee, we had fairly extensive discussion on this regional growth strategy. However, there have been a few calls from the general public regarding the green zone specifically. So I'm going to ask staff, I have given my opinion, but I will ask staff to just confirm the technical aspects of it. We used to have properties in the green zone, and there was one green zone in the former livable region plan. And now it's been changed, and there are different variations, shall I say, would that be fair, of the green zone. One of the questions I had this morning was Walton Park. That park and parks that are under 25 acres, and why are they being taken, why are we putting them in or taking them out of the specific green zones into a different classification. And I wonder if you could just clarify that for the general public. Mr. McIntyre?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, certainly, Your Worship. A couple things. First, it is true that with this version of the Regional Growth Strategy, the proposed RGS, they've taken what was formerly the green zone, and that's now been split into 3 green-like designations. There's the conservation recreation area. I'll come back to that in a second. There's, for those areas in the region, a small portion in Coquitlam, there's agricultural, and also there's a rural area. Around the conservation recreation, there are lands that we are recommending be placed in that designation, and the Walton Forest is one of those, along with larger, what we would see as regionally significant green space. The area along the Coquitlam River, Mundy Park, larger, extensive areas that have regional recognition, importance, significance. The smaller park areas, less than 25 acres, and in fact that's the cutoff they're suggesting, does not necessarily need to be in the regional growth strategy. In fact, with some of these smaller parks, particularly getting some of the linear features, there's frankly there's a difficulty in actually accurately portraying those in a map that's 8.5 by 11, that, you know, the format that the RGS is in. So there has been some greater certainty. There's more information now around green lands than in the previous LRSP. And so the recommendations in the report are that those that are privately owned, like the golf courses and that, they should just carry on as we have them designated in our official community plan, but not in a regional plan. The other areas, as mentioned, that have regional significance, yes, they should be, and we recommend that they be placed in this conservation recreation designation.
Thank you. And if I may, Your Worship, in the last couple of years down at Metro, we had, for the first time in many years, a couple of parcels, one in Delta and a couple in Maple Ridge, that had to come out of the green zone at Metro Vancouver. And it was quite an extensive and burdensome process to go through for anyone. So when they went through it this time, they decided to take the green zones and put them into the appropriate categories. The main thing for myself is that I want to decide the zoning in my city. I don't want to leave it up to 21 other municipalities to decide whether I have a park here or I don't, or I protect this land or I don't. And I think our staff have done just a yeoman's job on this, and the recommendations that you've come out with, I believe, put all the parcels of land into the appropriate categories, and I thank you for all your hard work, because this is a huge document to go through the technicalities on. So I will be supporting it as amended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some mixed feelings. First of all, I've lost faith in the GVD in Metro Vancouver some years ago. And the fact is that, you know, they're fumbling on many things now. Just on the solid waste, they've been at 10 years at it and not going anywhere, still spinning their wheels. Now, I noticed that they identify Coquitlam Center as one of Metro centers. Well, Coquitlam Center was the first center, Mayor. Coquitlam Center was the first center before any other centers came about, city centers. So, you know, I don't know that all of a sudden they're coming to the senses that it's one, they said we're number 3, I believe it is. Well, we're number 1 as far as city center is concerned. I've also got, you know, mixed feelings. I mean, Councilor Reid mentioned the fact that the green zone. And you're correct. The fact is that, you know, you want to take something out of the land that's all like concrete, can't grow a weed on it, never mind anything else. It's got to go to 21 municipalities at a public hearing to try and get it out. And any one mayor or any one director can vote against it, and that's the end. It doesn't go anywhere. See, these are the faults that we have. And who is our GVD? They're an elected body. There's not one of those board of directors on a GVD that's elected. So who are they responsible to? Really nobody. So these are things that I really have concern. And really, I'll tell you, Metro Vancouver, as far as I'm concerned, my own opinion, should be taken apart totally and rebuilt again. Because we have never had such serious... I remember back in 1972 when the Metro Vancouver was created. There used to be a lot of the positive things coming out of Metro Vancouver. Now there's nothing but negatives coming out of Metro Vancouver. They seem to think that these 21 municipalities are not part of Metro Vancouver. They're a baby of Metro Vancouver. So Metro Vancouver can do as they please instead of the other way around. And that's what's been happening. And I'll tell you, I'm really, really shocked at what's happening at Metro Vancouver. And take any department, and they're having problems. And I think it needs to be streamlined and need to be brought down to their knees and rebuilt again. That is my opinion, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize to my colleagues on land use. I'd read through this, and I thought I had all my questions answered, but I was still a bit jet-lagged, and so this was a cumbersome document. So I've had another read at it, and I have a couple of concerns. One actually has to do with their feedback loop and their process, and I brought this up before, and I see it isn't incorporated. They go through this whole process of regional visioning and values and sustainability principles and plans and processes, and they've given us this whole chart about how this whole process will work. And it ends with measures and targets with the sustainability report, and then it stops. And again, I'm just going to come back to this sort of this outcome idea that you need to take that and feed it back into something. And I still continue to struggle with why does it need to end at a measures and targets? And I think it needs to feed back into the vision. So I don't know that it'll go anywhere, but I'm just going to acknowledge that. The other one that I've certainly also received some phone calls and emails about this idea of the green lands and taking our request to take out certain lands. And in conversations that I've had with people, certainly over the weekend and today, what struck me is this idea that, and I agree with Councillor Reid, that I think we get to, as a city, make some decisions about these lands and what we do. But the anxiety that I'm hearing from residents is that I don't think that they trust this council, or maybe future councils, to make good decisions about protecting those spaces. So that's how I'm understanding that. And I know that we're going to be coming up with the tree bylaw shortly, and I know that people are still upset about previous decisions made by Coquitlam Council. So what I'm hearing from folks is that they don't have confidence that we'll protect these lands. And so what I've come to understand is they've certainly been asking me to support, to leave them because they have perhaps greater confidence in Metro, that Metro will protect these lands. And for me, that's a sad thing, that when residents don't have the confidence that their council will protect these lands, and that they would much rather that these 22 other municipalities, or 21 other municipalities, take care of our green space. So, my preference at this point is I would prefer to keep them in, mostly because I also don't have as much confidence as I would like to have. So that's all I'm going to say about it.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, you had
just a clarifying question to staff. These properties are not coming out of the green package. They are being broken down into green categories, which they never have been before. And it does not take Metro as a whole. This last year, it was just majority rule to get them out. So we have to be very careful of what we wish for here. And just so Mr. McIntyre, again, Your Worship, through you, I mean, we have looked at the lands that we had in our previous green zone, and some were not supposed to be in that zone, but they still have to be considered green. And I don't know. I don't think Richmond wants me rezoning their parks or lands or forests, and I sure don't want them here. Richmond, Delta, all the other cities, we all need to have some autonomy over our own lands, and these are protected. They're just different categories of the green, and perhaps you can clarify that in a better way than I can.
Mr. McIntyre, tall order.
Try again.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, under the previous Little Region Strategic Plan, the green zone was the all-encompassing catch-all. There was a lot of criteria for lands that would go in there, and such as private golf courses. And a lot of it was left to the decision of the community. Since then, this regional plan takes that green zone, that broad area, and differentiates, really gets into this area's agriculture. And there's certain issues and policies and authorities, Land Commission, that play a role there. These areas over here are rural. They're outside the urban containment boundary. It's out in the future. These other areas are the recreation conservation. And with these, again, they've come back to the member municipalities. There's some criteria that they're suggesting, but they've left it to the cities to identify what we feel are the regionally significant lands. That's the interpretation of the recommendation we're making. It doesn't mean that these green areas go away. They'll still be certainly within our official community plan. And the other key piece will be the regional context statement. Once the regional growth strategy is finalized and adopted, all member municipalities have 2 years to prepare a regional context statement. So really that's going to be the key piece that will relate what we have in our neighborhood area plans, official community plan with the regional growth strategy. So I think that's really where those connections will be made. And again, because it's appropriate, it's at the scale and setting of Coquitlam, relating up to that regional plan.
Hopefully that's clearer.
Thank you. This is a daunting document. This is the document here. It's quite an extensive read, and I'd urge members of the public who have some curiosity about it to go over to metrovancouver.org. It's available online. But also to offer their opinions, because as Councillor Reid and Councillor Robinson have both indicated, this is the challenging balancing act here is how much of our planning gets done by the region. As Councillor Sikora points out, a region whose representatives is not a body that you get to vote directly for. Each member is an elected member of a city council, but you don't get to vote directly for that body. And how much of the planning gets done there and how much of it gets done by the democratically elected council members in each one of the communities, each one of those 22 communities. That balance between regional planning and local planning, between regional decisions that are made by people in Richmond and Tsawwassen about Coquitlam, and decisions that are made by people in Coquitlam about Coquitlam. That's the balancing act that we're trying to work our way through on this document, and it is an extensive document. There's actually an important opportunity for public input into shaping our future. It's next Tuesday at the Executive Inn from 7 to 9. There's actually one every night over the next week or so, every weeknight. There's also a webinar, a seminar on the web the following day, Wednesday, the 27th, and that's from 11 a.m. to noon, and that would also be at metrovancouver.org. There's opportunities as well to send in comments by email. So this is it's an important topic, an incredibly important topic, and I'd urge members of the public to fill themselves in on the kinds of challenges that are before us. So, motion on the floor. I see no other speakers. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. Carried. Mr. Clerk.
Item 4 is the minutes of the Engineering, Utilities and Environment Standing Committee meeting of Monday, December 14th. The recommendation is to receive those minutes.
Councillor Sikora.
Yes. Item, the minutes of the meeting on item 4 are not correct. It says here that Councillor Sikora advised the proceedings with the work related to Regional Solid Waste Solution Standing Committee, and that the presentation by Cascade Renewable Carbon Corp is one of the 4 pillars. That is wrong. I don't wish to recommend anybody, neither will I. In my report, going forward to the council, to this council, for the solid waste, will not mention anybody as we're favoring or doing helping along to either do the work for the GVD or not, or for Coquitlam, or not do the work for Coquitlam. What I'm doing is I'm going to bring forward a report that will say, okay, we'll have topsoil, that will certainly use topsoil and also fertilizer and other ways of getting rid of our solid waste. And probably get to 70%, and only about 30% will go to landfill site. But there's many companies that we went to see. Mr. Suzak and myself spent 2 days. We went to Cache Creek, and then from Cache Creek we came back. The next day we spent a full day going through different companies that are doing different things in solid waste. Some that are producing topsoil, some that are producing fertilizer, some of them are doing other things. Those are things that we're going to be weighing out. But there's certainly nothing that, I know that Cascade made a presentation to us. They're one of the companies that may be able to provide service for the city of Coquitlam. But I think that should be struck out as far as that the presentation, the corporation is one of 4 pillars. I talked about 4 pillars, and I'm still talking about 4 pillars. But it certainly doesn't include any company. So that has to be taken out and changed, okay?
Are you proposing some language then to replace it?
Pardon?
Are you proposing some language to replace it?
Yeah, I think that the comment said that the presentation of Cascade Corporate is one of the 4 pillars. I did not say that. I said that there'd be 4 pillars to this program that I'm going to propose, but there'd be no company. We may bring other companies to make a presentation to this council, and they'll make a presentation to this council, but doesn't mean to say they walk into the council chambers.
Councillor Secor, can I suggest then that we change that wording from the presentation by Cascade Renewable Carbon Corporation to the composting of organic waste?
Yes, that's it.
Thank you.
But take out one of the 4 pillars for a report that will be from the standing committee, okay?
Well,
that's
right now it would read, and the composting of organic waste is one of the 4 pillars.
Yeah, well, that's right, but there should be no company mentioned. Okay? Thank you.
Okay.
Your Worship, we will take those comments under advisement. It's the committee itself that will approve the final version. So, but
thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Secor.
Appreciate it.
Okay. There is no amendment. The motion is to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5 is the minutes of the Engineering, Utilities and Environment Standing Committee meeting of Monday, January 11th. The recommendation is to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
The first item of business arising out of that committee meeting concerns the street and traffic bylaw amendment for Coast Meridian Road truck route designation from David Avenue to Victoria Avenue. The recommendations that Council give first, second, and third readings to the street and traffic amendment bylaw number 4097 in order to add Coast Meridian Road between Victoria Drive and David Avenue to the municipal truck route network, and 2, that the Translink Board of Directors be requested to designate Coast Meridian Road between David Avenue and Victoria Drive as an MRN element.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5.3 concerns soil substance removal fees. The 2 recommendations from the Standing Committee are that the Council receive this report on the review of the soil removal fees charged to aggregate miners under the Soil Substance Removal Regulation Bylaw 1914, and 2, that staff be directed to consult with the aggregate mining operators on the proposed fee increases outlined in the report and report back on a fee increase implementation plan later in 2010.
Thank you. Councillor McDonnell has a comment.
Thank you. I'd like to separate these 2. I have no issue with raising the fees. However, I do have an issue with the process that this is taking. And since we're going to address this process at a meeting coming up for council in the next 2 weeks, I would like to defer number 2 until after we have that meeting.
Okay. We won't have a motion to defer at this point. If we could move number 1.
Well, that's why I say if we separate 1 and 2.
Yeah. So are you moving number 1 then?
Yes.
Moved by Councillor McDonnell, second by Councillor Robinson. Recommendation number 1. Any discussion? Councillor Secor.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
One moment, please. There you
This
go.
one is one that goes back way to 1998 when the soil removal permit fees was upped from, I believe, from 13 cents to 26 cents. And I thought there was a further increase in the 90s, but I could be very wrong. So I'm not going to go there. But the fact is that, 1998, before the soils were permit fees have been renewed, and it's now 21 years later. It's a long, long time. And I think that, I know that whatever we're going to go to from here on, whether it be 50 cents, 60 cents, or 40 cents, you're going to have the screams from the operators, because it's a big jump at once. But I think that we should have somewhere where we can catch these bylaws and maybe address them maybe second or third year rather than 20, 21 years later. And I think that's the only thing I'm against, And I think that we should probably have the gravel operators here, the people that do soil removal before us, to discuss this item with us. Thank you.
Okay. It's true that this hasn't been dealt with for a while. There's some councils in the past that opted not to increase these fees. There's a motion on the floor now to increase the fees. Councillor Lynch.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting this report comes forward, and I don't think it was the previous council's desire not to increase the fees. I think at some point we'd asked that this be considered, and we were told that this was appropriate. And so I find it very interesting. We now have a report coming forward saying that it's been so long and that we should have addressed beforehand, because this has been called for before for us to look at this, to address this, and to increase it. And I know there was several members of council that queried whether or not the amount of money we were recouping adequately compensated us for the amount of road maintenance that it was being required in order to have these trucks going. So I'm glad this report is coming forward. I think it's high overdue. And I also think that it's incorrect to suggest that previous councils didn't request this previously.
Mayor Stewart? I thought we were just...
We aren't discussing number 2. We're motion number 1, which is only to receive the report, is on the floor now. Councillor Reamer.
I'll pass. Thank you. I said what I had to say.
Okay. This is essentially the purpose of this report is to charge fees per cubic meter of gravel. We have several gravel operators in our community, and the effect of those trucks on our roads causes damage. And the intent of these fees is to essentially recover the cost of that damage, the cost of repairing our roads, from the operators of the gravel industry. And that's the report that's before us now. The motion is to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. There was a motion, I'll go back to Councillor McDonnell, there was a motion to defer recommendation number 2 until after Council had been able to debate, to discuss this issue further on the process. That motion has been moved. Councillor Reid has seconded it. Any discussion on that? Councillor Lynch.
Well, I can understand perhaps the concern for us not to go ahead until we've had chance to discuss this further, but I don't see any real problem with asking our staff to consult with the aggregate mining operators. In fact, I think we need to, and they're going to be a big part of the process, and I think that it takes us a long time to consult and get anywhere, and I don't want to see that this being delayed in any way. So I don't see the need that we need to defer this and wait. I think that we can tell our staff to start the consultation process at present.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Well, the reason we're deferring it because of process is because we simply asked staff at the last meeting to go out and confer with the operators before they came back. We're sort of doing what we do to the public all the time. We're making the decision, and then we go, oh, by the way, folks, we've decided we're going to do this. Not right. Not right at all. And the process is wrong. Councillor McDonnell is absolutely right. It shouldn't come back to us, and we shouldn't agree on what we're going to do until we've had consultation. So I believe that's what he wants to discuss on some of the ways we do things around here. The public has the right to have consultation before we make up our mind about what we're going to do, and I believe that's why it was deferred, just simply for process. So if you feel that staff can go along and do their process, I guess they can go and do that as they will, but I'm certainly not going to make a decision on fees and all the things that they're going to have to do until there has been some discussion back and forth, and that's very fair. And I believe that's what Councillor McDonnell had in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Well, this has a huge impact on our aggregate mining operators, and I fully agree with Councillor McDonnell's wanting to look at the process. I think it's really important we do the process right and that we not hurry it through, and that we set up a process not only for now but for the future, so that we're not looking at this type of thing every 21 years. So I'll fully support Councillor McDonnell in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. I think that Councillor Lurch is correct. The fact is that, there's nothing wrong with the staff discussing it with the gravel operators. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. And then maybe they can go to the aggregate committee as the aggregate committee, as the delegation, and speak to them. And if the committee wishes, they can come and speak to us. And I think that something has to happen after 21 years. I think there's room for movement on both sides, and I think we should be doing it. But I don't know. I don't think we need to hold it up like forever and a day. We need to move on it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lynch has a follow-up question. I'm going to allow it.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. It's not really a question. It's just that I don't see the going along with directing staff to consult in a contradiction to what Councillor McDonnell is trying to achieve. I think that we can do both, and I don't think that we need to delay the consultation. It could, if we defer this, or are we saying that we don't want our staff to consult with the aggregate mining operators? I think we do. We're just saying that a process. So I don't see them as being contradictory.
Okay, and because we're dealing with the processes by which council makes its decisions, I'm going to show a little bit more latitude on the second round of speaking. So go ahead, Councillor McDonnell.
Well, to clarify a little bit further on my motion, in the report it says that the present soil removal fee that's being paid right now is 23 cents a cubic liter, or cubic meter. And in that report, they would like it to go to 80 cents. Well, if we, as a council, endorse this draft proposal that's going back out before any negotiation goes on, before the consultation takes place, then it becomes a matter of fact that council has said that, or it looks like council has approved 80 cents for a cubic meter. And that's certainly not my intention. I want full consultation first, and then I want to hear back from staff on what those consultation process what the recommendations are. I don't want to circumvent or put anything into these consultations from council, or that looks like it came from council, that would inhibit any of these talks.
Okay, we've been talking about a process that, and a report that was written by the engineering department. I'm going to ask our engineer, Bill Suzak, to comment.
Sure. Thanks, Your Worship. The information that's before you regarding 80 cents per cubic meter is not a staff recommendation. It falls out of a technical analysis, and that is all it is at this stage. An engineering firm has looked at the situation and said, well, here's our criteria for evaluation. We do not have a recommendation for a specific number, nor even a range at this time. We simply have a technical report that we wanted to forward on to the industry and engage the conversation. And that's
I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Suzak, but that's not the way it reads, and that's not the process that I would like to come from this council.
I appreciate the explanation of the process. What we've got before us right now is a sentence that says the review of this fee rate not only considered the impact of road maintenance costs, but also the taxes that the aggregate miners already pay and how competitive the rates are in comparison to other jurisdictions. Based on the analysis in this report, the soil removal fee should be increased to 80 cents per meter. And I understand the challenges that several council members have identified related to that and potentially the implications of approving that prior to consultation. This is a chicken and egg. We don't want, council would like to be able to make some decisions as to how we go forward with consultation, and then we take that consultation back to council and let council make the final decision on the rate increase, and I suspect that will come out of the debate we have on the process. The motion is to defer. Any other discussion? For seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora and Councillor Lynch are opposed. The motion to defer carries. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next item, 5.4, concerns Tree Management Bylaw 4091. The Engineering Utilities and Environment Standing Committee did not make a recommendation with respect to this item, but referred the following staff recommendation to Council for consideration. Upon review, staff is recommending that the recommendation 1, repeal the existing Tree Management Bylaw 3855, is not required to be considered at Council this evening. That repeal takes place through the passing of the actual new tree bylaw after fourth reading. So the motion before Council this evening is to give first, second, and third readings to Tree Management Bylaw 4091.
Move recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor McDonnell. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I have several questions on this. And perhaps through your indulgence, Your Worship, if I can just speak directly with Mr. McIntyre, who has sort of been, along with myself, the author of some of these things.
You need to take it out of the room at all, or?
Why, what?
It's okay. Go right ahead.
No, we'll get along fine. I have a lot of letters from some of our good citizens in the audience here discussing the tree bylaw, and they are comparing our tree bylaw to Surrey. And I remember a few years ago when we were hot and heavy into the tree management bylaw, and I specifically remember Councillor Donnelly and I driving back from Harrison while I'm trying to drive and draw pictures about trees and lots and that all the way back, saying why the one we had, it just wasn't going to work. We had to do something different with it. And we went along and we did something different with it. But one of the criticisms we had is that we didn't have enough consultation. And with that, we had a lot of the tree management people in and the environmental groups. And Councillor Donnelly asked that if we should get some experts in, arborists and other professionals. And we did. And I remember there was a huge meeting with everybody. And out of it came quite a lengthy report. So my questions are this. When you came to us, you brought the bylaw back, correct? And we all looked at it and we said, this is too wordy and too convoluted. And after great debate, we gave it back to you and said, please go and make it in plainer language and try and make it a little edited a bit so that it makes a lot more sense, so people didn't have to read 45 pages to find out what they could do with a tree. So what's coming back now is your edited version. Is that correct?
Through the chair, essentially that is correct. What is before council? Basically it's a replacement bylaw to arrive at that more straightforward, short and streamlined bylaw, rather than going in and changing every other line. It's just easier and more clear cut just to put forward a new bylaw. So that's what's before council tonight.
Okay, so my second question then is, so the reason there was no consultation on this is because basically it's a streamline of what we already had. Now, what we already had, did that include all the consultation that we did with Surrey and Port Moody and other cities with respect to their bylaws?
Through the chair again, that's correct. When the new tree bylaw was prepared a couple of years back now, one of the first steps is we went out and we checked what the other municipalities were doing around the Lower Mainland, and so we were trying to pick from the best in coming forward for a bylaw for Coquitlam. Also part of that process, well, after that, then council asked for us to go out and do some consultation, and that's where we had the facilitated sessions where the arborists were brought in and quite a cross-section of people attended. Coming out of that, we reported back to council with what we heard at those sessions, along with the advice from the technical experts, and that was worked into the bylaw previous. that bylaw now has been taken and streamlined, and that's what we have before council tonight.
So my third question then is, when you went through the process of having all the public opinion in and listening to all the various groups, is that information incorporated into the tree bylaw?
We received quite a range of feedback during the consultation a year and a half ago. That was brought forward, presented to council, and that was worked into the bylaw to the extent we could. There was differing views around things, and we had to make some decisions. The council had to make some decisions as to what would actually find its way into the bylaw. So it's always there. We consider that in this round of refining and streamlining the bylaw. Really, it hasn't changed the spirit and intent. We have again gone out around those areas in the bylaw, as pointed out in the report, like the replanting protocols and procedures. They're a little bit maybe overly complex and confusing before, so we've gone out and checked around how other municipalities handle that, and again have sort of picked from the best, and that's what's worked into the bylaw here. So yes, it has drawn on, because there's been a lot of discussion around this matter for over the last couple of years, drawn on that, and as well as always keep in mind what's done in other municipalities and what seems to work best there.
Okay, and my final question then is, in one of the things that I did garner out of one of the letters, I think from Ms. Baldazzi, and I thank you for that, is your replanting, like she put, which I consider quite cute. You get to choose the tree species in your replanting, so you could cut a large Douglas fir down and replace it with 2 monkey puzzle trees. So, is that true? 'Cause I don't like monkey trees.
With replanting, there's two criteria to apply. First, within the zoning bylaw for the northeast Coquitlam residential zones, there's a schedule of replanting based on lot size, and there's a list of appropriate species. Along with this new bylaw, supported by council, there is an updated user's guide, and in that it gives information around the types of species that are desired. But also, too, this relies a lot on an arborist or a professional forester or someone who has training or expertise in that area for them to assess the site, look what's being removed, look at other conditions, and come back and recommend replanting that's appropriate for that site. So, again, we're relying on an outside expert for that expertise and those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. So then, Your Worship, with all of that, these were serious considerations to bring up. And with all of that, if we've incorporated all these things, although they're probably not written out that everyone can totally understand your machinations that I'm sure you did in the Environment Committee over this, I feel that we've sort of got a comprehensive tree bylaw except for this replanting thing, and I do want to look into that before fourth reading. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I've got something for the overhead I'm going to bring up. It's not a picture from Jordan.
Oh, good.
You got to know how to operate that.
Pardon? So, I've been really sort of a bit overwhelmed and confused about this whole tree bylaw business. It's been going on for quite a while, so I decided to go back to the beginning and try to piece together the journey that this council and previous councils have taken in trying to develop a policy to protect our trees and our tree canopy. So I thought I would just sort of detail it out. I'm going to ask staff to help. It was about going back and finding reports and bits and pieces, and I suspect there's still some pieces missing. But in 1990, we had a tree bylaw that only applied to steep slopes and high-risk areas. And in 2000, the City of Coquitlam won the Community Energy Association Award for its Northeast Sector OCP, mostly because, and there are a whole bunch of reasons, but I wanted to highlight the protection of the area's significant environmental assets. So Coquitlam was acknowledged for taking that position. And at the heart of the planning process and the OCP, there were a whole number of principles that were followed that supported the ideas of sustainability and community energy planning. And again, one of the things that gets documented is that this OCP was set out to protect the area's natural features in environmentally sensitive areas. Then in 2001, the City of Coquitlam Environmental Committee recommends that the city update the existing 1990 tree bylaw to promote tree retention. In 2002, the City of Coquitlam hosted the Great Tree Hunt, and 114 Coquitlam trees were nominated by residents as great trees, and it was picked up by local media, CBC Morning Edition and Brian Minter Gardening Show. In 2005, Coquitlam completed a phase 1 of a tree review and assessment. In 2006, residents raised concerns about the removal of some mature trees in southwest Coquitlam. Later that year, and in February 2007, Council directs staff to develop a new tree protection policy for the city. Part of that direction is that the bylaw be drafted similar in nature to bylaws used by other municipalities. In May 2007, Council directs staff to follow the following guiding principles: simple, fair, effective, cost-effective, and then retain or renew tree cover where safe and appropriate and balanced with planned development. It was at this point that Council received a report from a consultant, Guy and Associate, that did not necessarily include monitoring of the overall tree retention or a public consultation component, and here's where we see this recommendation of a 2-tree exemption per year. In June 2007, Council directed staff to engage in a public consultation and report back on input. Next month, staff report input to Council, and Council directs staff to bring back a proposed bylaw to Council in September. In September, Council defers consideration of bylaw pending a shorter, more concise bylaw. Next month, Council directs staff to finalize bylaw and an accompanying resource guidebook. In 2007, Council adopts tree bylaw number 3855. And in January 2008, a notice of motion was brought forward to permit tree removal on properties greater than 0.7 acres located with improved neighborhood plans. February 2008, Council defers, waits for a report from staff. In April and May 2008, Council directs staff to have a community-facilitated discussion to determine solutions and identify areas for improvement. This, I think, was the most recent community consultation process. In January 2009, Council receives the report, Tree Management Bylaw Community Consultation Feedback, refers to engineering, utilities, and environment. March 2009, Council directs staff to prepare an amendment to Bylaw 3855 that would exempt properties under development that are within the approved neighborhood plan area, and they direct staff to further refine 3855 so that it's more streamlined and straightforward. October 2009, Council approves $55,000 to plant 10,000 trees in Coquitlam. January 2010, Engineering, Utilities, Environment Committee makes no recommendation for the tree bylaw. Did everyone get that? And it's no wonder we're so frustrated. I just felt like I needed to go back and take a look at where this council had been, where previous councils had been. And I apologize if my previous comments about the regional growth strategy seemed inflammatory. I was just trying to capture the frustration that I'm certainly hearing from some residents, that their struggle with Coquitlam Council around some of these issues, and the fact that this has taken us 18 months or 2 years or however long it's been to come up with a bylaw that's satisfactory, I think just adds to the frustration, and I think that perhaps their confidence in us to make some good decisions. So what I learned from this timeline is, on the one hand, we've been acknowledged for recognizing what an incredible asset we have in our tree canopy. I think that we would be hard-pressed to find somebody on this council, in our staff, and perhaps in our community that says they don't want trees. I think people do want them, and I think they value them. But I also believe that our tree canopy is more than an environmental asset. I think it's a community asset, it's a livability asset, it's even a business asset. Even our own economic development manager is starting to talk about how do we capitalize on our green as a viability, a business opportunity. He's looking at recreational opportunities that we can capitalize on. So the challenge that we have, certainly that I have, is how do we reconcile our commitment to the protection of the area's significant environmental assets that are our economic and livability assets, And how do we make sure that we engage in good public process that councils have asked for? At the same time, improving processes, policies, and services, which is the whole reason why we're doing this, why this is still at our table. So at this point, this bylaw is certainly streamlined and easy to follow as directed. It's very clear. But it hasn't quite convinced me that it's going to protect the asset that we said we want to protect. And I was chatting with Doug earlier, and he's not surprised that part of what I want to see is that we have some sort of tree count or some way of measuring that this bylaw is in fact doing what we say we're doing. I want to be able to say that, you know, we are protecting our tree canopy, and I'd like to believe that this bylaw would do that. And then I could sit back and say, yeah, we have a bylaw that does that. But I don't, at this point, I don't know that it would do that. It's the two-tree exemption that raises some concern for me. So I would like to add some sort of component, like Councillor Reid talked about this replanting. I would also like a measurement, and I'm wanting to know if that would be something that we could consider. I'm done. I just want to hear.
Okay. Mr. McIntyre, then?
Certainly, tree cover is it's a key part of the landscape of Coquitlam, and you know that can be tracked over time with you know air photo series. You can analyze that and see what's happening. The thing though is recognize is that extensive areas of the community, northeast Coquitlam primarily, are planned and slated for development. So you will see significant dramatic changes in that landscape in the short term. But as the neighborhoods are developed and the houses go in and the landscaping is included, it will green up over time. In fact, that's the origin of the replanting schedule that's referred to in the bylaw. It was anticipated that as northeast Coquitlam developed, included in the zoning, a replanting schedule to make sure you're trying to green those areas back up. So it's something we could certainly look at over time if directed by council to monitor that. Other areas, you know, some of the natural green space and parks and those areas, you know, they would tend to remain green over time. It's other areas in the community where you may see some transition. Sorry. I think the General Manager of Legion Parks also wants to comment on this.
Ms. McKay.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have benchmark data for the city broken down into 4 quadrants. This came out of the comprehensive landscape strategy that was done in 2005. I believe that was referenced in Councillor Robertson's overview. And at that time, it actually did measure canopy coverage for the city in each of those 4 quadrants. And looking at it as a total, we know what our percentage is. It is certainly within the range of what's recommended for the Pacific Northwest, but it provides us with benchmark data that we can monitor over time to be able to measure the effectiveness of this particular bylaw, should council wish to allocate resources to do that. We're currently at about a 39% canopy coverage as of 2005. So that's our benchmark, and we may, should council choose to direct us to do that, we may want to do that on a frequency of every 7 to 10 years to do that, to monitor how our canopy is doing.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much, Mayor. You know, I argued with this one last week when it came to our committee, Environmental Committee. I don't know how this rhymes very good with Environmental Committee. We're going to cut a whole bunch of trees down. How environmentally safe is that, or how good is it for the environment? Now, this thing has been kicked around from the planning department to Parks Recreation. I noticed the report has been written by the Parks Recreation director and also the planning director, and it winds up at the engineering director's table. Now, that, it's a real dog's breakfast to start with. But however, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. On page 5 on C, the schedule there, releasing schedule provide and no deficiency are found, 90% security release after post-planting inspection. Okay? Now somebody has to go inspect that. That to me is a whole lot of bodies. That bureaucracy is growing. Okay? And the remaining 10% after a year post-planting inspection. Is that going to be like the soils removal permit that's 21 years later? What is it? You know, I mean, those things bother me. You know, when I hear all these words that are written up and never, and how are you going to follow it without a whole bunch of bureaucrats? And then there's a place where you put a $3,000 or $300 per tree posting fees or plenty, and then if you cut it, then you replace it and sell your house. Who does the money go back to? And who does the money go back on this one? If this one is a year later, he sold the house, where does the 10% go? You're going to be chasing the old owner to give him his money back to find out where he is in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, wherever he may wind up at? That's bureaucracy of a worst kind. So it does nothing for the tree bylaw. It hampers a tree bylaw, matter of fact. And you know, in here, this thing has been around for 2.5 years. This is what really burns me. A matter of fact, you know, according to Councillor Selena Robinson, it's been around a long time, longer than that. But I remember it, and my memory is very good. And it's been, I'm going to mention 2.5 years, but it was longer than that. Then a year later, or 2.5 years later, we pass a bylaw, a tree bylaw, and we direct staff to do certain things. Lo and behold, a year later, the resolution the council passed comes alive. A year later, this thing comes alive. And it's become a bigger dog's breakfast than it was in the first place. Now, how can I support something like this with that kind of process? There's just no way. You know what? You're creating with a whole lot of trees disappearing and a whole bunch of room for bureaucracy. We might as well start building a new city hall right now, because there'll be bureaucracy chasing bureaucracy, inspection after inspection. You know, every you know, it's nice on writing to say, you know, a year later, and then a year later something else is going to happen. In this city hall, things don't happen. It took a year to get this darn resolution the council asked for a year later. So I cannot support this. I cannot support it for no money in the world. You know, maybe I could have supported it if it would have came to us about a month or two after the tree bylaw. But there's so many things that are so antiquated in this bylaw, and so that there's no way anybody could really, in their, I'm not going to say it, but how could I possibly support it when there's so many things in here that something that's going to happen in a year, something that's going to happen in 2 years, and who's going to be also collecting the fees? We're going to have a whole bunch of bodies writing out the receipts. We're going to have a new office collecting fees, permit fees. Who's going to administrate that? A whole bunch of bodies again. And it's just not going to work. So why pass something that is not going to work? And also, you know, this should have never come to an environment committee. It should have been the last. There's no environment committee could pass something like this. So I can't support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I had myself next on the speakers list. We do have a committee that deals with the environment, and we've had one for, well, I instituted after I got elected as mayor, a standing committee structure, and the standing committee structure puts the environment issues in a committee that's intended to deal with that. It's been there all along. It is true that in March 2009, 10 months ago, council directed staff to prepare amendments to Bylaw 3855. I'm disappointed that this streamlining of the bylaw took 10 months. I'm disappointed, as Councillor Sikora is. But let's understand the ramifications of some of our other decisions as a council. A year ago, the world economy had changed, and we were looking at a $5 million deficit within the city. And council had to make some tough decisions, as did staff, and some of those decisions were significant reductions in staff complements in several of our departments. And that didn't change necessarily the workload. It just changed the number of bodies that were there to try to do some of that work. And I'm not sure that that's exactly the cause and effect on this 10 months here. I want these processes to go more quickly. But staff have returned with the instructions of what we gave them 10 months ago, which was amend the bylaw, streamline it, make it work better. And all of the bylaw is intended to do is institute tree protection where it didn't exist. 4 years ago, there was no tree protection bylaw in the city of Coquitlam. There was a bylaw that protected some trees on steep slopes, and it was more of a soil erosion bylaw. And it was the council of the day that decided to institute tree protection on private property, but tried to do it in a way that balanced the need for tree protection with the need to ensure that residents didn't have real trouble with the bylaw. We didn't want a bylaw that essentially penalized anyone that planted a tree on their own property. So while we're trying to encourage the planting of trees, we're also trying to protect mature trees to the extent that we can. And I think this bylaw does that. It does it appropriately. Let's remember that the great tree hunt of 2002, the one that Councillor Robinson referred to, they were hunting for trees at a time when they weren't protected. I don't know where they could find any. If the tree protection bylaw was absolutely necessary to ensure that everyone didn't cut down their trees, then we wouldn't have had a great tree hunt in 2002. But we know that Coquitlam residents actually do take care of their trees. They value trees. We want to make sure that we work with residents in a balanced way to protect the tree canopy across our city at the same time as we encourage the planting of trees. Councillor Robinson also mentioned the council's decision, and this was one of my one of the initiatives I tried to set out at when I first got elected as mayor was the planting of 10,000 trees across the city. I want to go further than that, though. I want to encourage residents to plant some trees as well, plant trees on their own property, and through that process, as we go through the next year, I want us to move to residents and say, we want you to plant trees. But if at the same time as we say that, we argue that if you do plant a tree, you won't be allowed to cut it down without paying us a fee, then we're going to have residents necessarily saying, that doesn't make sense. Are you trying to encourage the planting of trees, or are you trying to discourage the planting of trees? So this is a balancing act, and I appreciate the work that staff have done. I think the bylaw does an appropriate job of balancing those interests and making sure that the tree canopy in Coquitlam is going to be protected for years to come. Councillor McDonnell is next.
Thank you. It has been a long process, but that's because there's a lot of interest in this, and people are rightly concerned about its outcome. There's been a lot of consultation go into this, but the thing that I like, in full marks to Mr. McIntyre and your staff, it's much more streamlined. It's a lot easier to read, but the most important thing to me is that it's easy to understand. Anyone that's going to pick up this bylaw and try to look at our tree bylaw, I think they'll be able to understand this. Not everybody's going to be happy with the outcome here, but it's a good compromise. I like this. I like the way this has come out. I support it, and I hope this moves on from here.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other speakers. Motion is before us. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Lynch are opposed. The motion carries.
Item number 6 is the minutes of the Recreation, Sports and Culture Standing Committee meeting held Monday, December 14th. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor McDonnell, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7 is the minutes of the Recreation, Sports and Culture Standing Committee meeting held Monday, January 11th. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 8 is the minutes of the Special Strategic Priorities Administration and Protective Services Standing Committee meeting of Monday, December 14th. Recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item of business arising out of that meeting concerns the 2009 strategic plan. The recommendation is that Council approve in principle the attached strategic plan 2009 pending further Council discussions in January 2010.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, this strategic plan, it's reviewed and updated every 3 years? Is that correct?
Mr. Dumont.
Through you, Your Worship, yes, that's correct. It's to be reviewed every 3 years.
And so, and I just want to sort of see how all of our different pieces come together that help with our decision making. So this is going to get, this is going to feed into next year's budget. This is what we're going to be using, referring to help us make some decisions, right? Business plan will come out of this.
That's correct.
And then we'll use that. Okay, so what would be helpful just would be to acknowledge that this happens every 3 years. It took me a while to figure that out. So if it could be sort of in the document that, or in the, anyway.
We can certainly note that next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 9 is the minutes of the Strategic Priorities Administration and Protective Services Standing Committee meeting of Monday, January 11th. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Lynch. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. My apologies. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question about item 2 on the minutes, having to do with the Golden Onion restaurant. I believe that Councillor Reid had mentioned something about extending the feedback area. Is that correct? Okay. Okay, that clarifies then. Thank you.
Okay, that was a clarification of the minutes. The minutes have been approved. Mr. Clerk.
Item 9.2, which does concern an application for a permanent change to a liquor license for a food primary establishment, the Golden Onion Restaurant at 3055 Anson Avenue. The recommendation of the committee is that the public consultation process be initiated at the cost of the applicant in order to determine the neighborhood response to and comment on the application by the restaurant for a permanent change to their liquor license to allow for patron participation and an extension of hours of liquor service past 12 a.m.
Councillor Reid, did you want to move an amended recommendation?
I do. This was given to me by staff because they did draw a map on the amended area. The amendment would be that the 400-foot notification area be expanded to include the area from Lincoln Avenue to Glen Drive between Pine Tree Way and Westwood Street. And I so move.
Councillor Reid has moved the recommendation but has amended it.
And Your Worship, if I may, the reason for the amendment is because the people that are going to be most affected by this would be the residents, and the only residents that live in it are outside the existing 400-foot circle. So this would incorporate all the residents that live there.
Okay, the motion is for public consultation process with a slightly amended radius. Moved by Councillor Reid, seconded by Councillor McDonnell. I see Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Till what time did they want this liquor permit to serve the liquor? Something beyond when the pubs close? Does anybody can give me some information? They want to go to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock? 2 o'clock.
The staff report says 2 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none. All in favor of the amended recommendation? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Item 9.3 concerns the 2010 by-election. The recommendation from the committee is that staff be directed to forward a letter to the provincial government requesting the following. That as part of a review currently being undertaken by the provincial government, which is the Local Government Task Force, consideration be given to allowing local governments greater flexibility to deal with council vacancies that arise during a term of office in order that local taxpayers are not forced to incur the high costs associated with holding a by-election. The council receive an update concerning the work of the Local Government Elections Task Force thus far and its planned timeline for reporting out. That pending the outcome of the aforementioned review, the City of Coquitlam be granted an exemption to the requirement to hold a by-election at this time, and thus be permitted to leave the current empty council seat vacant or allow it to be filled by an alternative means. And finally, 4, a response to the City of Coquitlam's request for an exemption be received prior to the planned appointment of a chief election officer at the February 15th regular council meeting.
Recommendation.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Reid. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I have several calls from this after it hit the paper, and it was all like I was re-electing Mr. Nicholson, which was wonderful. I love Mr. Nicholson. But the actual reason for this motion was to allow cities, not just ourselves, but other cities, to have options. If we have, I mean, I know in the last year, is it, Mr. Clerk, that we have an option to fill the seat or not? Is it the last?
Yeah, there's certain criteria, but basically if this vacancy had happened next January, we would be permitted to not have a by-election.
And so there's got to be some common sense here. We have to be able, I believe, as a city to have options on what we can do. Perhaps we all take extra committees and we wade our way through and save the taxpayers $250,000 or other options. But I think there just has to be a bit of common sense put to this. And before we go out to our election process, which we probably will be doing now, I hope that the province will at least take the opportunity to respond to us and tell us why or why not they would not grant us options. So I just wanted to put that out there, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. You know, we're banting around $250,000. That's been a figure been banting around. There's no reason why that should cost $250,000. We don't have to go to these fancy ballots with these fancy machines. We don't have to have all these polling stations with all the people that work at the polling stations if you're going to have a small turnout that we know will have. The fact is that, you know, maybe it might cost $100,000, but that's the price of democracy that you pay nowadays. Now, certainly we want democracy. I'd hate to think that this council, after knowing that there's now a slate in this council chambers, and it's been mentioned to me that there's a slate, and then a number of councils have been mentioned in the slate. The fact is that I'd hate to think that this council member will pick one of members for another slate, according to their slate, rather than being independent individuals. So, you know, I'm totally opposed to, I think we need to go to election. Let the taxpayers choose their sitting member that they wish to choose. Then it's not somebody that I would pick to represent the taxpayers. Let the taxpayers pick the person that's going to sit in here. And I think that's democracy. And democracy sometimes costs you a lot of dollars. And it's unfortunately that Councillor Donnelly left and went to Ottawa. I'm sure he'll be a good member of Parliament and certainly do a lot of good things for us. There's been other members that have resigned. I resigned in 1998, created a by-election as a mayor. And why? Because every council member wanted to be the mayor. So I thought I'd give them a chance to pick their mayors for the next few years. That's democracy, okay? Very, very simple. I don't know how much I can say it, but that's the way it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor McDonnell.
Thanks. I'm one of those who believe that we need to have an overhaul in our local government elections. However, just on this point, I see we're looking at an April the 24th election date. When does, Mr. Gilbert, when does that have to be official? By what date?
Sure. The staff plan is to bring forward a report at the February 15th regular council meeting, at which time we will appoint a chief election officer and a deputy.
So we have, I take it we have to name an election or name a date a certain amount of time before the 24th.
Correct. By the date that you appoint the chief election officer, you have 80 days in which to have the election, which must take place on a Saturday.
So while I applaud Councillor Reid's initiative here, it's probably unrealistic to expect the provincial government to get back to us in that short a period, but yeah, we'll see. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I fully support this, and I kind of suspect that Councillor McDonnell is correct that we probably won't hear back before February 15th, but I've had an awful lot of citizens approach me. This is going to cost the city $250,000. I've had a lot of citizens approach me and say, you know, do you really need to have another by-election? So I think we really do need to go through this process, and even if we can't work it out for ourselves, prior to February the 15th. Perhaps we can assist in with some other municipalities getting their situations sorted out. So I'm going to fully support this, and I hope that we do hear back from the provincial government prior to February 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. I have myself next. This has been a challenging year. This has been a challenging couple of years. And we've heard from lots of people on this subject. There's no question that the residents I've heard from have said the same thing as Councillor Reamer was just referring to, that this is a very costly thing, and we don't get that many people out to a by-election. In fact, I'm just going to read part of an editorial that was in one of our local newspapers. Coquitlam's taxpayers tab is expected to be approximately $250,000 this spring, and if voter turnout is the same as the 5% recorded in the 2007 Coquitlam by-election, that'll work out to just over $65 for every voter. That seems a steep price, especially since Coquitlam, like all BC communities, has taken a financial beating of late. Coquitlam should lobby the provincial government to seek alternatives to this costly exercise, providing the potential ideas ensure voters' wishes are reflected in the results. With the amount of money that could be saved, this is worth discussing. And I think that's what we're talking about here. We're looking at discussing with the provincial government whether there's alternatives. There are certainly other provinces in Canada do it differently. Other provinces have different options to allow that we don't have to have a by-election every time we have a vacant seat. There are other ways of filling those seats or of leaving them empty. Here in Coquitlam, the last few years, we've been having an election or a by-election every 18 months. And the voters we hear from are tiring of that, and they're not showing up at the by-election. And so, as a result, a council member could be elected with 1.5% of eligible voters supporting that person. And that's a real challenge to try to fulfill your mandate when you're not sure that you actually have a mandate from the voters. So I'm going to look to the provincial government. I hope that we can get a response quickly. I'm not sure we will, but this is a step worth taking, I believe. Thank you. Councillor Lynch.
Well, I guess my thoughts are along a similar vein. I'm going to support this recommendation, this motion. I do have a bit of a problem, though, with the idea of allowing a councillor's seat to remain vacant, because I know there's a lot of discussions we have around this table, and there's certain points of view that are represented that aren't going to be represented now, and that a by-election would allow that seat to be filled by somebody. And I think that there's a democratic process, and I think the citizens have a right to have those amount of people to be voting on their issues. Right now, we could theoretically have a lot of tie votes with an even amount of council to be elected. I certainly don't feel comfortable with the idea that council would, and it depends on what the criteria, but I would feel very much less comfortable with the idea that we would actually appoint someone. I feel very uncomfortable with that. And it may be that we're going to have a small turnout in by-elections. That's traditionally the way it goes. But that is still, I think that people respect the fact that we do have a democratic process. It's the amount of money it's going to cost to fulfill that objective that's the issue. It isn't so much that we shouldn't have another elected person. We're just very, very concerned about how much money it's going to cost to achieve that objective. And it's unfortunate that we are somehow coloring our objectives by the fact that it's going to cost us a few dollars. So I also don't believe that we're going to get a response back from the provincial government that quickly. Surely it was a long time ago, it was several years ago, that we've asked them to look at things like increasing the term to 4 years instead of 3 years in order to save the cost of the city of having by-elections as often. And that's something that's been done in other provinces throughout the country. So it'll be interesting to see what type of response we get from the provincial government, if we get one at all prior to the time that we need to appoint the chief election officer. It's very unfortunate, though, that we're coloring our thoughts and our ideas on what we believe is democratic based on whether or not we can afford it.
Thank you. Well, the advantage is, of course, the provincial government is conducting a review right now, so it's possible we can get an answer quickly. The motion before us is staff recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. I'm sorry. Councillor Sikora is opposed.
Item 10 is the City of Coquitlam Highway Dedication Cancellation Bylaw 4065, which concerns an area adjacent to 710 Alderson Avenue. The recommendations that Council give consideration to fourth and final reading of Bylaw 4065.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Reamer. I'm going to speak against this. There's actually and we had a chat with the city clerk this morning. In this staff report from the city clerk, the second line of background says the intent of this bylaw is to close a portion of Gerard Avenue adjacent to 710 Alderson Avenue. And that actually isn't the intent of the bylaw. The intent of the bylaw is to facilitate the construction on an adjacent piece of property of a duplex that the owner of that property wants to build. The way we'll do that is by closing a portion of the Gerard Avenue adjacent to 710, and then sort of allowing him to use that property closure in the calculation of his square footage, because his lot is too small for a duplex, but not actually take over that property because his fence would have to be back on his old property line. I think that's just a bastardization of the process, a manipulation of it. And we're bending over backwards trying to achieve something. Now, if it were something that Council had as its objective to achieve, such as innovative, low-cost densification of our community, as is reflected in our southwest area plan, then I would say maybe that's worth doing. But duplexes are actually something that most members of Council have expressed reservations over because of the proliferation of duplexes in Millardville. We are left with not that many options for creatively densifying Millardville with coach houses, carriage houses, and other initiatives, as Council was considering and has considered many times in the past. So I'm actually urging us to reconsider this one. This is at fourth reading, and to actually go forward with a statement to the industry that says, no, actually we want creative infill, we want creative density in Millardville and throughout Coquitlam. The duplex isn't the only tool that we have in our tool chest. We can do some other things. So, no other speakers. All in favor? Opposed? I'm the only one opposed. Councillor Sikora has voted for a duplex. Yeah? Weird. Okay. Yeah, well, you always swore that you'd never vote for a duplex, and you've just done it. Thank you.
That's not what the intent of the bylaw says.
Obviously, I'm not part of whatever slate someone's talking about.
Item 11 concerns community programming and local Cablevision. The recommendation is that a letter be sent to Shaw Television and the CRTC, highlighting the importance of community programming and encouraging their continued support, and that a copy of this letter be forwarded to Metro Vancouver for their information.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Lynch. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I actually think this is a benign letter, and there's a buzz. This is actually a benign letter that really says nothing, and I did have a chance to read the background on this, and my take on it is that there is a real challenge in the nature of the relationship between community programming and Shaw. And the question becomes, how do we hold, if Shaw's doing community programming, how do we hold them accountable, and what does that mean to them? Because I think we have a challenge here about if the community has certain kinds of programs and Shaw gets to make unilateral decisions without consulting with the community, is that really community programming? So I'm actually not thrilled about sending a letter that says we think it's important that community program continue and thank you very much for the support, because so what? What I want to send is a stronger letter that says community programming is important to our residents, and we want Shaw and its partners to engage in a dialogue that talks to how are we going to make sure we can deliver this in a way that meets the community's needs, and Shaw feels like they have some role here. this is just too benign, and I want something that has a bit more punch to it, that speaks to getting down and getting dirty and trying to figure out how we're going to do this.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Well, somewhat along the same lines, I think we're blessed with the coverage that we get from Shaw TV and the volunteers. They've been just super to us through the years. But I don't know if Shaw really realizes how important this is. This is an integral part of our communications between us and the citizens in our community. We could have had, for instance, I know everyone's going to shoot me for this, but we could have had the tree bylaw dialogue on Shaw so that everybody understands where it's coming from. We could have had different discussions. We have all the subjects coming up, like the dog off leash, the doggy parks, the things that affect everybody's everyday lives, where we put supermarkets, where we think it would be best to have rapid transit, why buses don't go in certain areas. I mean, there's so many things, and I'll tell you, it really rubs me the wrong way when I sit on the board of Pocomo Youth Services, which has the bus that goes around, and we try and pick up kids at night that need rides home or need some assistance in some way. And it's just a fabulous service for the community, like many other services that we have. And when do they put it on? At 1 to 3 a.m. And, what good does that do? It doesn't inform our citizens, and I just think it's wrong. I think we could be doing a better job. And so I agree, we need to send something stronger. I think every community has its own version of how good or how much they use it. But in our community, I think community television is a necessity. So I too feel the same way. Thank you.
And I agree that community television is absolutely important. I want to thank Shaw for being here today. Some people watching at home tonight, I'm sure. I also want to thank Shaw for the cooperation. For example, council, one of our initiatives has been the webcasting of every council meeting and committee meeting, whereas before it was just every second Monday, the council meeting was on television at 9 p.m. and then repeated again on Saturday. You had to watch during those particular moments or else miss it. With webcasting, you can actually go online and on the city's webpage, click on it, and watch it any time, day or night. I'm actually pulled it up a moment ago, and I'm watching live what the fellow in the back is taping for the 9 o'clock version of Shaw. That webcasting, tonight, we're actually using Shaw's feed for webcasting, which is an incredible cooperation between City Hall staff and the clerk's office and Shaw, and I appreciate that very much. Through these kinds of methods, we can communicate better with our citizens, let them be more aware of what we're doing, what council's doing, and what the challenges of various public policy decisions are. And we can get a better feedback from the public, but it's only through better information. And so I want to cooperate with Shaw. I want to find ways that Shaw can do its job better, but of course Shaw is working in various communities. There are 5 city councils in the Tri-Cities, just in this one area, so Shaw's got its challenges as well. I'm not disappointed particularly with the wording of the letter. I'm interested in hearing any particular changes that council wants to suggest. In the end, I want us to continue to cooperate with Shaw and with various other providers and with our staff in finding better ways of communicating with the residents of Coquitlam so that they can understand the kinds of work that council's doing, the kinds of work that staff are doing, and the kinds of work that community groups are doing across our city. So right now we have a motion to forward a letter. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Item 12 concerns the Metro Vancouver Board and Brief, for which our board representative is available to respond to questions. The recommendation is that Council receive this brief for information.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's the last formal item on the agenda this evening.
just wanted to bring everyone's attention to a program that we'll be running. The city of Coquitlam is very pleased to be hosting one of the last celebration stops on the torch relay as it crosses the country on February 11th, the day before opening ceremonies in the Dome. February 11th, the torch will arrive in the Tri-Cities, and a big celebration stop is being planned right now from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on February 11th at Mackin Park. We know that there will be thousands of students from various schools, people from across the city, residents, community groups, all celebrating with the torch relay. There'll be details later this week, I suspect, on who's going to be running the torch and those sorts of things. The excitement's really building here in Coquitlam, and I look forward to seeing many people down at Mackin Park on Thursday morning, February 11th. Any other items? Motion to adjourn?
No, I've got one.
Councillor Sikora.
Yes, I've got a notice of motion, Mayor. It says, whereas the citizens of Coquitlam should have the means to directly elect their representative to the Board of Directors at Metro Vancouver. Therefore, it be resolved that the City Council of City of Coquitlam request the provincial government to amend the Local Government Act in order to explicitly allow the city representatives at Metro Vancouver to be chosen by electors of the City of Coquitlam as part of each general elections. And therefore, it be further resolved that a copy of this resolution goes sent to Vancouver Metro and that its member municipalities for their information and consideration. It's signed by myself, seconded by Councillor Lynch.
Okay, our council procedures permit a councillor to move a notice of motion that will be considered at the next council meeting, which will be February the 1st. That's fine. Councillor Robinson, one moment, please. Wait for the microphone. Councillor Robinson, go ahead.
Thank you. I too have a notice of motion, smoking bylaw. Whereas 82% of Canadians do not smoke, and whereas it has long been recognized that secondhand smoke contains over 4,000 chemicals, including 50 known chemicals to cause cancer, and whereas senior levels of government have taken actions under their respective jurisdictions to protect citizens from secondhand smoke, such as the federal government's Non-Smokers Health Act passed in 1988, and recently strengthened in 2007, banning smoking and more recently smoking rooms from the workplaces, and the provincial government recently amended the Motor Vehicle Act to ban smoking in vehicles where a minor under 16 years of age is present. And whereas the Fraser Health Authority supports limiting exposure to secondhand smoke, and whereas smoking restrictions increase the motivation for smokers to quit or cut back, decreases negative role modeling for children, protects the environment, and reduces litter. And whereas direct enforcement from the municipality may not be necessary, as experience with outdoor and indoor smoke-free laws has shown that the bylaw itself is enough to deter most people from smoking. In addition, peer pressure arising from the common understanding that the space is smoke-free also deters people from smoking. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Coquitlam develop a ban on smoking on public patios and spaces where minors under 16 years of age might be present. And that the City of Coquitlam invite municipalities in Metro Vancouver that have yet to develop smoking bans to consider such a ban. And that the City of Coquitlam asks the province to consider a ban on smoking in all public spaces. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Barry Lynch.
Thank you. Any other items? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. According to our council procedures, we permit a 15-minute question period of up to 15 minutes on matters relating to the agenda of the council meeting. Okay, our council procedures, they're on the board above us. I'll just read out a couple of relevant ones. It's one question, please, limited to 2 minutes maximum time limit. These aren't statements, these are questions. Go right ahead, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Helen Brown, 2855 Walton Avenue, Coquitlam. Pardon me, I put candy in my mouth. My question is in regard to the decision by Coquitlam to, and this is regard to the regional the most recent draft of the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy. I'm quite concerned about the decision, and this is on page 4 of the report in the minutes tonight, or the agenda, that says that several general urban and industrial areas in the Pacific reach Cape Horn, Fraser, Melton, Lloyd corridor to mixed employment area, that private golf course lands from conservation would go from conservation recreation areas to general urban area, and that all small city-owned active parks, i.e. those generally less than 25 acres in size, would go from conservation recreation areas to general urban area, and that riparian corridors and environmentally sensitive areas from conservation recreation area to general urban area, except for significant open space areas along the Coquitlam River. And I'm glad to see that, in addition, it was recommended that all designated urban forests, Riverview, Walton, and Mundy, I guess, would be the other one. It's not listed here. Would Mundy be the other? That those are in the conservation recreation area. Now, I went on the Metro internet site to see what was allowed in these general urban areas. So a general urban area includes neighborhoods, schools, shopping, etc., plus local recreation areas.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
We're limited to 2 minutes each, and there are other people lined up. So.
Okay, well, my question is, I guess then, I know my question is, why would the city suggest to Metro that our parks, they're less than 25 acres of size, and I would give as an example Glen Park, which has a lot of trees on it, why that would be changed from, or submitted to be, that it should be a general urban area.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, Your Worship, just very briefly, and we can speak after the meeting. Within the general urban area, there would be a number of land use types. There could be extensive areas of residential, commercial, civic, and parks. So it's a larger catch-all area that could include local parks, school sites, and the like.
I don't understand. I mean, to me, putting it in, designating it as an urban area would then mean that those parks could be rezoned quite readily and used for something other than what the rules say, the Metro rules say, all they say is that new major trip and employment generators that can be accommodated in urban centers are discouraged from locating in general urban areas. But those are the only things that they say are discouraged from being located in general urban areas. So I translate that, I'm just putting this forth as a concern, but I translate that as meaning that if somebody wanted to develop Glen Park into something that is not an employment generator and is not what's the other thing, a major trip area, then it could be done. And it could be done if only 2/3 of the Metro membership agrees. And I think this should be 100%, that if 100% of the members of Metro think that Glen Park, for instance, should be changed to something else, then, but 2/3, I don't think is very fair. I don't know why we're sacrificing these areas by taking them from conservation to recreation.
We're not sacrificing them. There are occasionally times when, for example, a sliver of a park is used for some other purpose, or a parkland is swapped for other parkland. To suggest that 100% would be required means that someone in Tsawwassen has a veto over whatever the elected officials in Coquitlam are hoping to do as they manage the parkland and the various other lands. As far as someone being able to develop the park, they have to own it.
And right now, personally, I don't think that it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next question.
My name is Christina Baldazzi, and I live at 2570 Burien Drive in Coquitlam. I'm here to ask the question about, well, I'll start this way. I'll say that June 25th, 2008, the community workshop was held for the tree management bylaw, and it included a lot of different people from the community, including developers and scientists, and people belonging to different environmental groups, and just your interested citizen. Out of that came from staff, came an attachment, or a document I should say, called the Tree Management Bylaw Community Consultation Feedback. This was developed by the General Manager of Planning and Development. In that were some of the key recommendations out of that one, and it says, and I'm going to read straight out from that document, inventory of city tree resources. One of the key public interests expressed at the workshop was a desire for the city to know what tree resources exist and the appropriate management thereof. There was concern by some that the 2-tree exemption per year may result in a significant but unknown loss of trees. Now, we heard today, I think it was Councillor Robinson bring that question up, and there was some discussion about the fact we've had a tree inventory in the past, 2005. But nothing was actually resolved. We were told that, well, maybe in 7 to 10 years we can have another tree canopy inventory and then we can see what's happened. Well, in 7 to 10 years, a lot can happen. And then what if you do find that a lot has happened? How do you address that? What do you do then? Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to go door to door and force people to plant trees? Or what are you going to do? My suggestion is that if you permit every tree but waive the fee, basically what happens is that every person then has to submit a sheet, which can be faxed to city, saying, I want to cut these 2 trees down.
I'm sorry, do you have a question? Your 2 minutes is long over. I just wondered if you have a question, because I know I saw someone else up as well.
Yeah, the question is, what are you actually going to do about this one key public input that we had, that we need to know what the losses are actually going to be? Not in 10 years, but as they happen, so we can actually do something to replace. You don't want to replace the trees in 10 years when they could be replaced right then and there. Well, how are you going to address that? What kind of... What are you going to build into the whole system?
Ms. McKay, please.
Yes, Your Worship. The city does have a tree management program in place. Actually, we will be sharing that information at an upcoming committee meeting, and that manages all of the trees that have been planted and are on the inventory, and they're based on the resources that we have available. The inventory does not include a comprehensive inventory of every tree, both on public and private land in the city, and the city has not had the resources in the past to do that. So we have 2 management tools that we use. One is the street tree inventory. The other is the overall canopy assessment.
Thank you.
Well, how often are you doing that?
I'm sorry. Our council procedures, and they're up here.
Didn't we used to have 5 minutes?
I'm sorry, then we'd only allowed 3 questions per question period. The council procedures that have been adopted and that I've been asked by council to enforce ask for 1 question for each person, a 2-minute limit. I made that clear at the beginning of question period, and it's up on the board. Actually, the procedure suggests that the questioner should return to the seat after asking the question. These procedures were established by council in order to try to facilitate as many questions as possible. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Elizabeth Baldazzi, 2566 Burien Drive. The first question is going to be, obviously I'm going to have to talk fast here. The first question is, can you lengthen this public discussion process that we're having now to allow for more than 2 minutes per person? Because that's not a very long time. So is there something that can be done right now to make sure that we can either speak longer or that more people can speak than the allotted 15 minutes at the very end of this proceedings?
I'm sorry, council could, I suppose, change its procedure bylaw, but that would require some time.
Well, there's nothing else that can be done. You can't now move that we have longer than a...
We actually aren't in a council meeting right now. Council has established a 15-minute question period at the end of council, and that we're trying to use it as effectively as possible, not enter into debates, and to allow as many questions to be asked.
We hardly get any input, and 2 minutes is not very long. I better go with my second question now. I have a question for clarification for our citizens in Coquitlam, and this is regarding the tree bylaw. You suggested that public input had been included in this last draft of the tree bylaw. I'd like to know what part of the last public input process, which was the workshops that I attended, the workshop, was added into this new draft. So I'd like to know what was included out of all the public input that was done.
Okay, Mr. McIntyre.
The workshops from mid-2008, that information was reported to council. That was the basis of the bylaw that was written previously, and this is the bylaw that was taken and has been streamlined. So it was in the bylaw before, and it's we're aware of as we came forward with the streamlined bylaw now.
So you're saying that the public input process was already included in some other paper that was brought forward? Like, can you please clarify that again? When was it brought? When was the public input included into the tree bylaw that we have right now, of 2008 of the workshop?
Your Worship, I believe the timeline that was put up there earlier showed how the dates and the public meeting was reported back to council, and in the bylaw. I think the direction back to staff was at that point after that was to streamline the bylaw.
Okay, but where did the recommendations go that the public input, where, can you tell me where they were put into the tree bylaw after that workshop? And if you can't answer it today, I would like you to really get back to me, and I would like to get a copy of what the public input was at that last workshop, and I'd like you to explain to me where in the new current bylaw where those recommendations from the citizens of Coquitlam were put into this current streamlined tree bylaw that you're proposing today.
And I'm going to suggest that staff will probably be better off getting back to you on that one, and that's always an option, is to ask staff after the meeting for clarification or questions, and staff will undoubtedly be trying to get back to you with an answer to your question. Thank you very much.
And when can you get back to me by with this information?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Obviously, I wasn't answered again, and I really hope I get an answer to this one. Thank you.
Ms. Baldazzi, we gave you twice the allotted time. I realize that that's not enough, but I gave you twice. I gave you... Next speaker, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Ev Gauthier, 2578 Burien Drive. My question is in relations to the tree bylaw. The history that Selena brought forward shows that the intent of the tree bylaw was to protect all of Coquitlam's trees, while now it only protects some. All properties with less than 2 trees on it are pretty much provided with no protection, and they could cut both trees down in 1 year with no requirement for replacement, no education to alternatives, no inventory of what we've lost, and no requirement for arborist assessment for risk. And I want to know, how does this new tree bylaw that has been passed through third reading today, how does that actually provide tree protection for every significant tree in Coquitlam, every mature tree, every property owner, and all land, private, public, and development and new development? And I just would like clarification on how this council believes that this is actually an encompassing bylaw. Thank you.
Do you want to try that, Mr. McIntyre?
Well, to be very brief, the bylaw applies to all properties in Coquitlam. There are certain exemptions. As mentioned before, you can remove 2 trees a year. lands under development application that are going through a rezoning or development permit or subdivision aren't technically subject to the bylaw because the whole matter of tree clearing and replacement and is dealt with through those development processes. So it's not being disregarded, it's just being dealt with through the overall development application process review. So two situations, one the bylaw applies to directly, the other sort of indirectly, but it's taken up through the development process.
A quick second question to that.
Go ahead.
For the new development, if you had any exemptions, you had an inclusion saying if the tree bylaw standards are more strict in the OCP than this bylaw, then they're exempt, rather than just exempting all of the trees in the new development areas? Could that, it would include all the trees and make the bylaw more comprehensive, but it would exclude those under stricter regulations for tree protection as set in the OCP.
I wouldn't agree with that. I think that in either instance you're relying on professionals, arborists, foresters, to look at the tree resource on a property and in light of what's proposed and what's planned, recommend either removal or replacement of trees. So at the end of the day, you're going to end up with replanting that may be more limited because there has to be some construction, but it will be based on what's safe for that particular site in either instance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Do I have to state my name again? No, right?
Well, if you'll look
okay,
at
Christina Valdazzi.
the council protocol says citizens will be allowed one opportunity. I'll give you a second opportunity, but please, there are many opportunities to dialogue with council members. I know every one of them will state
but I haven't
afterwards.
gotten any results
I know you'd like to do it on camera, but if you'd like to go ahead.
This is actually a clarification of something else, so that's what it is.
Go ahead.
Just to say that on February 16, 2009, we had a council meeting. At that time, there was an option 3 proposed for voting, and that option 3 stated, implement improvements to further streamline and refine the current bylaw, incorporating key recommendations provided through the community consultation process, and staff working with the current bylaw. That was February 16th of 2009. Now, that was deferred because you wanted to omit the development areas.
Do you have a question, please?
Yes, the question is, if that's the case, if on February 2016, the option 3 for implementing improvements to the bylaw that you've just done asked for incorporating key recommendations provided through the community consultation process, then how can you say that they were already included in the previous bylaw? You see what I'm saying? In February 16th, you said that you wanted to incorporate the key recommendations. On March the 2nd, when it came back for final vote and it was voted for, that part had been removed. So I came down here and I asked council and I asked staff as well, was that an oversight? Or are you planning to include the public consultation process? At that time, I was told by council that, oh, no, don't worry, that's public consultation process will be included. So now you're saying that it was included in the previous one, but it wasn't, and it wasn't included in the new because you streamlined, but you didn't include the public consultation process.
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, I'm sorry I'm being here confusing tonight. What I'd want to do, I want to go back and I will pull the reports from the files with the staff recommendations. We will see what the motions were of the council or the committee meetings as to what the direction was. And I think we have those that information, those facts in front of us. We can have a more informed discussion. Lastly, though, I think coming out of that public consultation session, my recollection was we heard a lot of views. We heard a lot of different perspectives on this matter. That's what was reported back to council. And at the end of the day, there had to be some decisions made about what was going to be incorporated in the bylaw.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thus ends question period.
Thanks.
For anyone, there's always the option to dialogue with individual council members before or after a council meeting, to email them. I know almost every council member every council member I know of replies to their emails and tries to answer individual questions. Staff are ready to talk to you as well. This isn't an attempt by any means to stifle the debate. This is an attempt to answer questions, and that's why we limit it to questions, not comments, not statements and try to limit it so that we get as many questions in as possible. We thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.